Once all your physical audio connections are made, you'll need to configure your session for these connections. So, on your master screen, touch the Setup menu and select Audio I/O. The panel that opens is divided into 4 main sections. The left-hand side of the panel lists your physical ports, the local I/O, the 2 DRAC Cat5 connections, and the standard MADI port. Touching the ports selects them, and the currently selected port is highlighted blue. The top strip allows you to name and configure your selected port or rack. The large graphic in the middle of the screen represents the selected rack. Touching this picture selects individual sockets and cards so that you can name and configure them. Often, in an install or touring system, naming sockets makes setup and routing quicker and easier. The bottom section of this panel is the setup panel for the selected card in a rack or socket. Let's look at these in a little more detail. The audio I/O configuration in a session needs to match the connected hardware. If you're using the standard MADI to connect a Digico rack, then select port 3. Then, on the top strip, touch the down-pointing arrow under Device Type and select the appropriate device from the list. Now press the big red Conform All Ports button in the bottom left-hand corner of the panel. The console will automatically configure all your ports to match the connected hardware. It's worth selecting each port in turn and checking that everything looks right. You can manually configure the hardware too. With a rack selected, touch one of the cards within the rack. Now, in the bottom Card Setup section, select the correct card from the drop-down list. On a D-rack, you can only do this for the second output card. The rest of the rack is a fixed configuration. But for DigiRacks and other MADI-connected racks, each card needs to be set correctly. You can now name your ports, cards, and sockets. If you have 2 D-racks connected, you might, for example, name them Stage Left and Stage Right. With the first D-rack port selected, touching the first socket, here labeled 1, Mic 1, selects that socket. Now, in the bottom section of the screen, we can rename the port. For example, call it Kick, and we can rename the first card. Here, I've called it Drums. Each card is 8 sockets, inputs or outputs. On the D-rack, they are arranged in horizontal rows, and for the larger racks or standard MADI connections, the cards are arranged vertically. You'll see that once you have a socket selected, the properties for that socket can be configured, phantom power, pads, etc.